Chair, it appears that we have quorum. You may proceed and start the meeting whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right, very good. Thanks, Hannah. Good afternoon, members of the Transit Committee, and welcome to the April 1st meeting of the committee. This meeting is now called to order. As a reminder, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. We will begin the meeting now with a roll call of all the members. So Hannah, if you would.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start the roll, starting with Jill Dusenberry, Matt Dudley.
I'm present.
Thank you. Andrew Blanchard. Jason Crampton.
Here.
Thank you. Jose Macias.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Here.
Thank you. Dawn Coomer.
Hi, this is Dawn.
Thank you. Nathan Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy.
Here.
Thank you. Tony Flood.
Here. Did you get that?
I did. Thank you.
Thank
Reed
you.
Kempton.
Here.
Thank you. Jody Sorrell. William Beloit. Jesus Sapien. Nina Arredondo. Heather Wilkie.
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair Corpella. Salvatore LaPuma.
Here.
Thank you. Kristen Taylor. Sam Stevenson. Gabe Elias. Carol Ketcherside.
Present.
Thank you. Grant Anderson.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Link.
Here.
Thank you. And are there any members that I may have missed?
Hi, this is Andrew Blanchard from the city of Buckeye. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We have a quorum. You may proceed.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Okay, next item is a call to the audience. MAG provides the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, informational items, or items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. Members of the public are invited to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with the committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Hannah, have we received any online written comments for the call to the audience?
Chair, we did not receive any online written comments.
Okay, very good. Move to item 3, Transportation Planning and Performance Program Managers Report. This item is on the agenda for information and will be presented by Ted Brown, MAG Transportation Planning and Performance Program Manager. Ted, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start by highlighting Arizona's 37th annual statewide transit conference organized by the Arizona Transit Association and ADOT. It's happening April 8th through the 10th in the city of Mesa. It's a significant event for our transit committee representatives covering topics such as state transit funding, ADA compliance, cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, you name it. For more details, please visit the Arizona Transit Association's website. Next, I'd like to recognize MAG Transit Committee's own City of Phoenix representative, Jesus Sapien, for being featured on Valley Metro's Storylines podcast, most recent episode, where he discussed all the transit planning and preparations that went into hosting the NCAA Final Four. I encourage you all to listen to the episode, which can be accessed on the Valley Metro website or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, I'd also like to remind the committee that preparations for our annual joint meeting with MAG's Active Transportation Committee are underway. We're planning for an in-person meeting on June 3rd, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That completes my report.
Thank you, Chad. All right, item number 4, approve of the March 4th, 2024 meeting minutes. Does any member of the committee have any questions regarding the minutes from the previous meeting? Okay, hearing none, there's an opportunity for members of the public to comment. Hannah, have we received any online written comments for this item?
No, Chair, we did not receive any online public comments for this item.
All right, very good. Can I have a motion to approve agenda item number 4, the meeting minutes from last month?
Anderson, I so move.
McMurdy, second.
Okay, we have a first from Grant and a second from Christine. Thank you very much. We will have those participating in the meeting take part in a voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We need to see the faces of everyone to participate in the voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who do not turn on their camera. So members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so that staff can count the people's names whose cameras are not on. Okay, so can I have a voice vote? Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, thank you again. Members, please leave your camera on while Hannah takes a roll call of the members that did not turn on their camera. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. It appears that there's only one member without their camera turned on. Nathan Williams, how do you vote? I didn't catch that. Could Nathan, if you could try again?
Yeah, sorry. Aye. Apologies.
Thank you so much. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, very good. Item number 5, preventative maintenance formula update. This item is on the agenda to recommend approval and will be presented by Steph Stearns, MAG Transportation Analyst. Steph, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Link, members of the committee. Thank you very much. Like the chair said, I'm here to present this item for action. If I could please have the next slide. Thank you. So I'll walk through this pretty quickly. The presentation is nearly identical to what we went through last month. Preventive maintenance, or PM, covers the maintenance costs related to vehicles and is used to offset operating expenses to member agencies. We've been allocating federal funds to preventive maintenance in the MAG region since 2008. Next slide, please. So how the formula is currently written, it's only for the Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale urban area. And we are proposing to update that. So we'll walk through exactly what it looks like now. If I could get the next slide. So we take 25% of the 5307 apportionment. One more click, please. Thank you. And funds are distributed between the bus and rail systems according to operating expenses. Here is a proportional visual example. In our region, approximately 85% of the operating expenses are for the bus system, 15% for the rail system. Next slide, please. Funds are then distributed between the bus operators based on passenger miles traveled and vehicle revenue miles. Next slide. And this is just a representation of the transit operators in our region, shown in no particular order, but alphabetically. Next slide, please. So now we'll get into the proposed formula update. We propose updating the formula. First of all, no change to the Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale urban area. Funds would first be split between bus and rail, our rail operator being Valley Metro Rail, and then allocated to the bus operators based on the criteria and weights in the formula. We propose adding the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale urban area to the formula. As we know, there are no rail lines in this western area, so it would just be for bus operations. One more click, please. As a reminder, the PM formula utilizes National Transit Database data. It's typically on a 2-year delay. And this data is operating expenses, passenger miles traveled, and vehicle revenue miles. One more click. Thank you. The PM formula would be effective beginning in fiscal year 2024. Next slide, please. So then, based on the feedback we got last month at Transit Committee, there were a few questions. So we did some additional work to show the formula in action. You'll note that this is the same table of information that was included in your agenda packet. Next slide. So we first looked at the regional cost of PM for the most recent fiscal year, that being fiscal year 2023, and the total regional cost was just over $36 million. Next slide. Then, using the same criteria in the formula, we allocated the cost between each urban area. The Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale urban area accounts for approximately 94% of the vehicle revenue miles and passenger miles traveled in the region, while the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale urban area accounts for nearly 6% of the vehicle revenue miles and passenger miles traveled. So the proportional PM cost, respectively, for Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale and Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale is $34 million and $2 million. Next slide, please. We then projected the 5307 apportionments for each urban area. These projections were based on the partial apportionments that FTA released earlier this year. $75 million for the Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale and $7 million for the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale. Next slide, please. So then applying each estimated apportionment by 25%, nearly just over 18 million, nearly 19 million for Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale, and about 1.8 million for the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale urban areas. We verify that there are enough costs to support allocating 25% of each apportionment to PM. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, that concludes my presentation. The action requested is on the slide. However, I'm happy to take any questions should there be any.
Okay, thank you, Steph. Do any members have any questions or comments for Steph?
Steph, this is Matt Dudley from Avondale. Thank you guys very much for going through that. It definitely helped me when I was trying to figure out exactly if there was enough allocations for PM, but that formula was exactly what I was looking for. So thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments for Steph? Okay, prior to voting, there's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on the item. Hannah, have you received anything regarding this item?
Chair, no, we did not receive any comments on this item.
Okay, very good. Can I have a motion to recommend approval of the preventative maintenance formula for FTA 5307 funds for large urban areas?
This is Matthew Dudley. I will make the motion.
Thank you, Matt. We have a motion from Matt. Do we have a second?
This is
Kristen
Carol.
from Surprise. I will second.
It was kind of a tie there. Kristen, did you second it?
Kristen can have it.
Okay. Thanks, Carol. Okay, we have a motion from Matt and a second from Kristen. We will vote by turning on our cameras again and unmuting our audio. Members, please leave your cameras on just like before until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. Very good. Okay, members, please leave your cameras on. Hannah's going to take a quick roll call of any members participating virtually that did not turn on their camera. Hannah?
Chair, it appears that everyone has their camera turned on, so the motion passes.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. Item number 6, regional programming guidelines for federal transit formula funds update. This item is on the agenda for information, discussion, and potential action to recommend approval and will be presented by Steph Stearns. Go ahead, Steph.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Me again, here to present this item, like you said, information, discussion, and possible action. Next slide, please. So similar to our last presentation, this is nearly identical to what we went through last month. I won't read through everything word for word, but we'll just hit on the high levels. The regional programming guidelines for federal transit formula funds, also known as the guidelines, are our regional policy for allocating FTA funds in the region. They were last updated in 2019, and MAG is proposing a series of technical updates to the guidelines to reflect changes based on the 2020 census. These changes do not include any Prop 479 policy changes. Next slide, please. Shown here on the screen is a map of our urban areas based on the 2020 census. We had some changes to our urban area names, the Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale and the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale urban areas, and then updated classifications. So the Phoenix West Goodyear Avondale urban area is now considered a large urban area with a population greater than 200,000. And then Maricopa down here in the purples in the southern part of the map is a newly created small urban area with a population greater than 50,000. There was no change to the Phoenix Mesa Scottsdale urban areas designation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the proposed updated guidelines are included in the agenda packet for your review. The general updates include some cleanup of text and clarification of existing processes. The sections that had programming updates were sections 500 and 600 that discuss the proposed PM formula update that we just heard in the previous agenda item. Section 800 is adding in the Maricopa urban area as it's new to our region. And then a notable difference from last month is some graphic updates. We have updated the cover page, overall layout of the document, graphics, and maps. But the text, the content is otherwise identical to what we provided in last month's red line version. Next slide, please. I would like to note that MAG staff have not received any comments or questions on the proposed updates ahead of the meeting. So I leave this up to the committee for information, discussion, and potential action, or any questions before we get to that point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Steph. Do any members have any questions or comments regarding this item for Steph? Matt, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yep, I do. Steph, thanks. So going through this, I know from the technical side, I'm good. I've had some discussions, so I have the intergovs with MAG on how we can look forward with the success of microtransit to get federal funding into that. And I understand that that's more of a discussion in the future, more when we pass 479. So first things first, but looking through the document, again, it's kind of a slight update for the last one. The document reads more like a presentation than a guideline. For instance, I can look at section 500, our transit programming priorities. And, you know, before that, it's pretty good, but we hit those 7 different subsections. For instance, we have provide services improvements as required by law. So if somebody who's not familiar with transit or this document in general, they could pull this, open this up, get to this transit programming priorities list and figure out, well, what provides services improvements as required by law? Where is that? We kind of briefly allude to that kind of in the beginning of the document, but it's really kind of not called out. It would almost seem better if we would have almost kind of a little bit of a subsection saying, hey, you know, here's transit programming priorities. Section 1, provide services improvements as required by law, which is maybe a paragraph or two of what that means. The same thing you can kind of tie in for transit programming priorities number 2, provide funding for support services for grant management to the designated recipients, the city of Phoenix. What does that mean? I think that means 1% or 10%, but you really would not know if you pick up the document to kind of really kind of figure it out. Everything else is okay. You get to like section 9, programming of transit federally funded non-TLCP project, it could be a little confusing to somebody. Would somebody say, hey, is this a process for priority 7? If so, it should fall maybe under the proposed subsection of priority 7. So I think maybe there's just a little bit of work that we can kind of go in there, maybe clean up the document, make it a lot easier for somebody who picks this up to be able to kind of read the guidelines. But from a technical perspective of what we have, obviously we just talked about section 600 with the PM distribution methodology. That's great. The priority 7 of projects, but just kind of maybe a little bit of a cleanup on some of this stuff. So if somebody does pick that up, there's a little more clarity to the document. And that's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Chair Link, Mr. Dudley, and members of the committee for that comment. I will say for the I think it's the first priority, provide services or whatever's required by law. That is, we can definitely include some more information there, but I will say we are intentionally a little bit vague there because, as we know, with new surface transportation bills such as IIJA, new things can come into play, and this kind of covers us if the Fed said something like everyone needs to have at least one bus with purple stripes or something crazy like that, then it would already be included. We wouldn't automatically have our guidelines be out of date. A more real life example of this is since the guidelines were last updated in 2019, the PTASP or Public Transportation Agency safety plan requirement and safety targets were put into place that says if urban areas are not meeting their safety targets, then some of they need to demonstrate that they are spending federal funds on projects that are going to help attain those targets. So that's an example, but I would be happy to make some updates, provide some more concrete examples that someone reading the guidelines could follow.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And I was thinking even Steph, kind of like we have, what is it? When we hit 700, priority 7 projects, that next page after that, we have like 710, 720, 730. Maybe it's something kind of almost exactly what you were saying. Maybe it's a 510, 520, 30, 40, maybe on the next page with some brief examples of how that kind of ties in to that. I think that would really tie it together. So that way, when people do hit the next sections, they have a better understanding of what those subsections in 500 really mean.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Steph?
Jason and Chandler, I'm just going to piggyback off something Matt said. I agree, Matt, that we need to, in future discussion, consider microtransit as a part of these federal formula funds, and hope to have that discussion in the future. I think between that or regional funding, I think there needs to be some sort of attention given to microtransit. I realize it's a bit local, but we do use those to connect to the regional system where it makes sense to as a more efficient operation than extending a bus line. So I think there's a number of agencies probably interested, but I think that's a discussion that we need to have at some point.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. So Steph, how do you want to do this? Do you want to go ahead and put it to a vote now and then do the additions later on, or do you want to do that and bring it back next month? What works better? What do you think would be the better way to go here?
Chair Link, I would defer to members of the committee and what they are most comfortable with. If someone wanted to make a motion to say, we would like to recommend approval of the updated guidelines, pending additional information in section 500. That's something we could do. If you just say, no, we'd like to hear it again next month, that's also an option. So I would really defer to what the committee would prefer.
Okay.
This is Matt from Avondale. Is there a rush to approve it this month? I mean, I just kind of like we were talking about the preventive maintenance formula from last month. if there's no big rush, I would prefer that we would maybe, you could take this back, adjust it, and then we can kind of take a look at, the whole document again, and then vote for it next month.
Absolutely, Chair Link, Mr. Dudley, and members of the committee. I mentioned this last month as well. We don't currently have our federal fiscal year 2024 apportionments yet, so we're not able to really start development of the POP or any of the processes that are outlined in these guidelines. So as of today, there is no rush. I'd certainly be happy to bring this back next month for consideration.
All right, thank you, Steph.
Any other committee members have any comments as far as if Steph takes us back and makes the additions and puts the examples in and bringing it back next month? Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
I agree.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Andrew. Everybody else okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes,
Reed.
I agree.
Anybody opposed and wants to vote on it right now? Okay, Steph, well, let's do that then. Make those additions, and if you have any questions on the particulars of what the committee is looking for, reach out to us and we can give you the suggestions, or I know you took notes, so you have that. So then let's do that. Let's take it back and make those suggested edits and insertions, and then we can bring it back in May and hopefully vote on it and get this thing done.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, will do.
Okay, item number 7, Valley Metro 2023 Origin and Destination Study. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Aaron Xavier, Valley Metro Service Planning and GIS Manager. Aaron, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Chair Link, members of the committee. Glad to be here today on Monday, April Fool's Day. But this is a serious topic here, the 2023 Origin Destination Study results. So some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not, but I will go over the background a bit. And feel free to ask questions at the end because there's quite a lot to go through. Next slide. So in this presentation, I'll go a bit over the study background and the purpose, essentially why we go through this effort every few years, the travel patterns that we uncovered from the survey, the changing riders that we've seen on the system from this iteration to last, and the needs that they're showing us that they have for transit, and some of the conclusions as takeaways. The next slide. So as a bit of background on the study, this gives us a lot of information for a lot of different things that we do, both at the agency and with our agency partners. So we use this in our Title VI analyses for things like service changes, looking at the demographics of the folks that are riding the routes specifically that are getting changed to support travel models like the MAG model, stops and similar models. Supports before and after studies for capital projects like South Central Extension, the capital extension, and things of that nature, and helps us understand really the rider travel patterns and demographics. So from a service planning perspective, this is really important to put our ear to the ground in a broad swath, essentially, not just rely on anecdotes or data points. That this is really getting in-depth information from folks and their feedback. Next. So this covers all the different modes that we have, pretty much except paratransit and van pools. So light rail, streetcar, local bus, commuter bus, circulators. And we conduct this about every 3 to 5 years. So this is the first one that we did since COVID. So that's why, I think it may have been getting a little bit of extra attention. That a lot has changed, obviously, since then. People's attitudes about transit have changed. The demand for transit has changed. The way that people are traveling and commuting throughout the valley have changed, which just compounds the dramatic change that this region sees generally with such a large amount of growth year over year. Next slide. So just to key in on that last point in terms of understanding the rider travel patterns and demographics. So we really want to know who stayed and who left since 2019. Obviously, a lot of flux has happened in the ridership figures. We want to know what kind of travel patterns they're essentially getting into and how those compare to previous patterns. how those needs have changed in terms of the purpose of the trips that they're taking and so forth, and how we can use all this information ultimately to adapt our system to a higher level of productivity. Next slide. So as you can see in the background here, the survey is collected as an intercept survey on tablets. So folks will be selected at random. They can't self-select. So we try to do a couple things to make it more randomized and therefore accurate to the population that's riding transit. This was collected February to May, pretty much during our peak. So we're getting the snowbirds, we're getting the students, not really being affected by the hellish heat that we have in the summer and so forth. So it's just trying to make the sample as robust and reflective as possible with the population. It was about 31 questions, and overall we collected about 22,000 surveys on weekdays and weekends. Next slide. So for the travel patterns that we've experienced or saw in the survey, next slide. I think one thing to note, obviously we have had a pretty dramatic decline in ridership, and the sampling that we do on this survey mirrors the ridership that we see on the system. So we try to sample proportionally based on the ridership that we see on our validated ridership system. So in this case, primarily it's the fur boxes, but we do also use the APCs to try to figure out some other elements and kind of supplement it to get a greater picture. But as you can see here, compared to 2015, 2019, we were in a little bit of a backslide, and then obviously COVID hit and took quite a big bite out of our ridership. Next slide. But also, as you can see here, the rail-only proportion and the rail bus portion has come to represent a much higher proportion of the overall ridership. So I think in part this is reflective of rail recovering a little bit faster than the bus system. So it's ultimately making up a greater proportion. But again, as you saw, really not in absolute numbers that much different than what we were seeing pre-COVID. Next slide. One really important dynamic to take note of, and again, we kind of knew this looking at the ridership, but also reflected here in the origin destination survey, is that the primacy of the peak has kind of waned over the past few years. So on the left, we have bus graphics. To the right, we have rail graphics. The top is the 2019, so pre-COVID. Bottom two graphics are 2023, so post-COVID, the most recent survey. And two things you can see here in some of these different graphs is that we used to have really pronounced peaks. The PM peak would often represent 2 to 3 times as much as we were seeing in the off peak, and sometimes more. But now the times through which folks are traveling on transit have spread out. So you may attribute this to a loss in some of the work trips, as we'll discuss a little bit later. But just generally a much smoother, I think, peak than we've seen in the past. Which as we keep that in mind about the point that we made about how do we adapt our services to meet the growing or new emerging needs of the system and to the public. How do we adapt to not just think about the peak service, which is often the case in terms of making really robust peaks, and maybe we give a little bit of the off-peak service because it's not as productive, that maybe it would serve us better to start looking at some of those off-peak schedules and seeing what we may be able to do to serve folks better. Next slide. So as we, as planners, had a couple of theories about who came and who left the system. One thing we thought was, obviously those folks with more transfers are going to have, less convenient trips. Those are probably the folks that are going to peel off the first chance they get. But that didn't really seem to be the case in terms of the transfer data that we had. So 45% of trips in pre-COVID era, 2019 survey did transfers, and actually a little bit more had transfers in 2023. So it doesn't seem like the transfers are a huge deterrent, at least from this metric perhaps, but just something to think about. Next slide. So there's a lot going on in this map, but essentially the background shows population growth. It's kind of a heat map. The purple areas have higher proportional growth than the other surrounding areas. Red lines show a decrease in the number of trips that are linked from, I believe these are zip code to zip code, where the thicker bars are larger decrease or increase, and the thinner bars are smaller increase or decrease, and the green lines are, of course, increases. So a couple things you can note here are that the growth seemed to occur in some of the longer intercity trips. So a lot of travel to, North Phoenix to Tempe and Mesa. So a lot of those inner city trips do seem to light up, where some of the shorter trips seem to get taken down a bit. So that may be due to the rise of micromobility options, TNC options that, you know, if I'm making a short trip and there's an Uber available, maybe people are just getting peeled off because of that, or maybe because of the fair weather that we enjoy for many parts of the year, that folks are just more apt to take e-bikes or e-scooters now that have proliferated around the valley. So that may be taking a bit of a bite out of our smaller trips here. You can click again. You'll note that, you know, as I noted, the shrinkage seemed to occur in some of those smaller trips where a lot of the red lines do seem to be shorter than some of the green lines here. And then finally, if you click again, there is not a perfectly intuitive match of the rise in population with the rise in travel demand overall. So typically you would think, you know, if an area is experiencing high population growth, then probably you're going to see a proportional or some kind of a outsized growth in the amount of transportation demand in that area. But that doesn't seem to be the case in all areas. And so I think digging into some of these next few slides on the trip purpose will, you know, help us uncover that. But you know, just to give some context and some background. So, you know, obviously, the city of Tempe has a lot of green lines to it. Downtown Phoenix, not as much. So one thing that we thought, you know, potentially has to do with the loss of the proportion of work trips, and a lot of the downtown center being work focused, where some of the other areas are more, you know, perhaps nightlife focused or entertainment focused or recreation focused. Next slide.
Hey, Aaron, before you go to the next slide, can you go back?
Sure.
Just one. Is it possible that some of this purple is the increase in multifamily housing in these areas? We didn't really talk much about housing when we were going through this at Valley Metro, but I know every time I go down there, it just seems like condos are cropping up everywhere. And I wonder if there's been any attempt to correlate more of that kind of housing with transit, which would certainly help us with messaging.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Christine. There's a lot of, you know, especially in downtown, we see it all the time with the cranes constantly moving. A lot of multifamily going up down here. And I know that our Capital folks work pretty closely with City Phoenix for transit-oriented development and communities type work to try to promote that, not only the development placement, but also kind of evangelizing transit and the importance of you know, having those options and marketing them to those folks. But I do think it is, you know, an important avenue to, you know, discuss, you know, with our city partners, and of course to have that outreach to those newer folks that are coming into the valley, especially if they're, you know, in an area with a lot of transit coverage. So I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide. So touching a little bit more on the rider demographics and needs, kind of touched on this before. Next slide. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a decline in the number of home-based work trips, and conversely a rise in the number of home-based other trips. So it used to be that in pretty much every other survey that we took, the home-based work trip was the, you know, predominant trip. And now essentially I think this is the first time in our survey's history since, you know, 2000s, early 2000s, that that's not actually the case. So the home-based other trips are things like medical trips, recreational trips, trips to church, and things of that nature, which I think ties in a bit with the point that I had earlier about the loss of the primacy of the peak, where you're not only seeing a spread in terms of the dimension of time, where folks are not, you know, just traveling to work during the peaks, and that's kind of what we think about when we plan a lot of these schedules, but really people are diversifying where they're going, why they need transit, and so diversifying the areas that we serve and how we serve them, I think just based on this data point, would probably serve us better than still trying to hammer away at those work trips and trying to get those back, because that may be something where the marginal utility isn't quite as high as going after some of these home-based other trips. Next slide. On the weekends, we see a little bit of a different pattern. So the work base is actually going up and the home base other is going down, but it's almost as if the proportions in that sense are converging to be more spread out overall and not as concentrated in one thing or another, though obviously the home-based other does kind of win the day on the weekends. And actually it may help us that, the home-based other is going to be generally the most predominant trip, that would probably make it easier to plan things similarly from the weekend mentality that we used to have, as opposed to the pre-COVID weekday mentality. Next slide. So zero-car households, another hypothesis that we had in terms of who came and who left during COVID was that a lot more zero-car households were going to show up on the survey, but that didn't really tend to be the case. About 55%, only up about 4% from pre-COVID surveys, shows that while they're still the predominant user in terms of demographics of the system, when you slice it by number of cars in the household, that didn't actually go up dramatically from the previous surveys that we have, going back to 2007, where it's just about 50% or so other riders who did not have cars in their household. Next slide. But one thing that we did note was that there was a pretty notable increase in the number of folks that didn't have driver's licenses, so up to 49% from 42 the previous iteration of the survey. So even if folks may have had cars in more or less similar proportions to what they had pre-COVID, that perhaps more of them are now unable to drive. So maybe a bit of a mixed message there, but still it's critical to be keeping these folks in mind in terms of potentially expanding service or adapting service, that these folks are pretty much our strongest foundation of ridership and our most consistent riders throughout time. Next slide. Another thing that we did note was the widening gender gap. So as you can see here, from 2019 to 2023, it's almost gotten to the point where men outnumber women 2 to 1 on the system. So a lot of hypotheses as to why this is, but a couple things that we're working on are safety and security perceptions. We surveyed on that before. They do seem to be fairly similar on the rail, but there is a bit of a disparity on the bus side. So we are looking into how we can make this better. We implemented a couple programs like Project Blue Ride, and working more closely generally with PD on the bus side to help the enforcement and help the visibility that the system is generally safe, especially when you compare it to some other systems in the country, and especially because we're not a system on the light rail, as an example, that has this kind of gate where folks can essentially walk in and out even though they're not supposed to. That it does still remain relatively safe compared to those other systems, but there are other hypotheses, but I think this is one that we are still looking into, because it is essential if we want to grow ridership and see this gaping hole in our potential ridership, that this is a really key demographic to start working to gain back, essentially, to levels that we've seen previously. Next slide. So here we have the income distributions, 2019 in green, 2023 in purple. So a couple things that you can probably see here right off the bat is that a much higher proportion of folks are making below 5,000. So a couple of these are students, but many of these are essentially homeless folks. We know that over the course of these few years, the homeless population has really grown in the region. So I think as transit is a reflection of the city that it serves, that this is kind of being reflected here in this data point. And also a slight decrease in some of those middle incomes from about 25,000, this is household income, to about 50,000 have actually come down. Next slide. So smartphone ownership. This is something that comes up a lot when you're talking about outreach and mobile fare and things of that nature, where we still see kind of a recalcitrant little minority of folks that just do not have a smartphone, not interested, and even of those that do, not everybody has a data plan that allows them to utilize things like the mobile fare, the tracking vehicle in real time off of a wireless network. So about 93% of riders do have a smartphone, so this is encouraging as we really do lean into some of the more modern developments that allow people to track their ride in real time, their fares, but still have to be cognizant that there is a good amount of folks that, about 1 in 10 that don't have a smartphone with a data plan. Next slide. And this is especially important because the rise of the online tool, as you can see here, has really exploded. It's almost flipped from what it was before. So tools like the Valley Metro website, should be the Valley Metro app, kind of retired the Right Kick app. Some of the other apps has come to about 9 in 10 folks now relying on that. Whereas offline tools like the Transit Book, which is also retired, customer service calling, and NextRide has fallen to pretty much record lows. And I think it's logical to attribute this to the rise of mobile fare, tracking your vehicle in real time, things of that nature. Where even if they're not using our app, they're using Google, they're using Transit, and other things like that allow them to make connections on Transit and just use the system in a lot more efficient and intuitive ways that don't require lugging around a book or a paper schedule and things like that. Next slide. So in conclusion, next slide. We are seeing more all-purpose transit trips during the weekday. So trying to plan a little bit better to kind of those non-work trips, I think is going to be essential as we evolve our system to a higher level of productivity. Next. The income curve has seemed to flatten out a little bit, but definitely spiked on the lower end. And that marks a dramatic increase of lower income individuals on the system. So, being cognizant of serving those folks and also how those folks and potentially the rise of them on the system impacts the perception overall, I think is essential to understanding how people perceive transit and how people use transit and how we can better serve those folks who are obviously using the system as a lifeline to get to a lot of the essential services, probably more so than the choice rider or the folks with cars. Next. So the gender gap has risen significantly to where men outnumber women about 2 to 1. So tracing this back to why this is occurring and then essentially trying to reverse it, I think is essential in bringing back the ridership. Because obviously it's 50-50 split more or less in the population, so we want to see that reflected in our ridership. Next slide. So most riders still come from zero-car households. So even though there was a significant proportion rise in the number of folks without driver's licenses, still more or less the same, and still need to keep an eye on making sure that the services that we implement or change are sensitive to the needs of this population, because they are more than 50% of the folks on the system. Next. Riders continue to migrate towards those online sources of information. So I think as we lean into that, it makes us, competitive with the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. And it's really something that folks have come to expect, in a modern age where so much of their life is channeled through their phones, for better or worse. And then finally, the trips involving rail did jump, quite a bit proportionally. So probably attributable to the faster rise of the rail in terms of the ridership from the streetcar, and obviously the streetcar is helping to contribute to that. So as we rapidly and voraciously expand that rail system, I think that is also having a significant impact. So final slide here. I just wanted to thank everybody for hearing me out here, and I did want to note that for those who do not attend Service Fund Working Group, we have a couple online dashboards that display all this information. So you can go on there anytime, dig into the data from 2023 and 2019. Has all the questions from those surveys. We've done one that maps all the different trips throughout all the jurisdictions with filters like, did they start in my jurisdiction and so forth. So I encourage everybody to go on and use those tools, reach out if they have any questions. And if you'd like me to present any of this to, your city council or staff, feel free to reach out and I'd be glad to do so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Aaron, for the presentation. A lot of good information. Do any members have any questions or comments for Aaron regarding the O&D study?
Anderson.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Grant.
First off, change the slide to the next one if you would. Somebody flipped it back. But I thought this was a lot of really, really good information, a lot of hard work in getting all this information. I just wanted to say thank you.
Absolutely. Glad to be here and glad to share this information, committee member Grant and members of the committee. So anytime.
Any other questions or comments for Aaron?
Yeah, this is Reed Kempton. On page 32, where you're showing the graphs and the changes, on the right side, you used the same scale, but on the left side, you didn't. I think it would be more dramatic if you actually use the same scale on the left side as well.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. I will. I'll keep that in mind. Appreciate that, committee member.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks again, Aaron, for the presentation. Like I said, a lot of good information. A lot of stuff we can use. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, it takes us to item number 8, requests for future agenda items. Are there any requests from the committee members for an item on a future agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to number 9. Any comments or general announcements from the committee members regarding anything?
Hey, Kevin, this is Matt from Avondale. You're going to be at next month's meeting, right? Before you retire?
Man.
Just making sure, right?
Yeah.
Proper send off.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thanks, Matt. Anybody else? All right, hearing none. Next meeting of the Transit Committee, MAG Committee, will be on Monday, May 6th at 1 p.m. If there's no further business, today's meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for